Hey everyone, it's Vicki Weber here with At Home Author, and I'm super excited because today I've got two special guests. We've got Katie Weaver and Clay Anderson, and they are going to be talking all about how to have a great cover for your children's book. But I will let them do the talking.
Okay, Clay, ladies first. Go ahead.
Oh, is that how we're going to start this?
Sorry, I couldn't help it. I said I was going to try and be a good person, but it just comes out.
Well, Vicki, we're happy to be here, and hopefully we can give you some valuable pointers and tips and a little guidance for the whole process of cover design. And we'll try to show you a few examples that we've done over the years, and some like befores and afters and that sort of thing. So
Well, since Clay didn't share this with you, I will brag on him a little bit. He is a very successful children's book author in his own right and sells a ton of books. His most popular book is a book called This I Know. And if you don't know this about me, I recently sold my bookstores, but for a while I was the owner of five children's bookstores, and Clay was my top selling product. And among all stores, this was the only book I sold by the case, or I bought by the case. And it's because people would stop in their tracks when they saw his cover design. He's very talented, and I'm happy to know you, Clay. And he's also just an amazing cover designer and book designer. And we have become fast friends over the last how many years? We became fast friends like how many years ago? 4 or 5 years ago?
something like that. Has it been that long? Yeah. Katie,
Like 20.
I wanted to partner with her on a Facebook group for cover design. I'm like, sure. And we barely knew each other at the time, and the rest is history. But so
Well, I was crushing on his cover design skills. So that's what we're going to get into today. I've done my fair share of book design, which include cover design, but I've also just done a bunch of covers independently. And I have one book out currently, and I have two more coming very soon. Um, but both of us have designed numerous, I would say almost all the books that we've designed, can I brag a little bit, have won cover design awards, almost every single one. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, I just kept trying to give some why you should listen to us. Because the jokes are good. The jokes are good.
we've got some experience a little bit.
There's a reason we're not listening to design tips from me because I can't even draw a stick figure. So
Well, there is an art to cover design for sure. There is a lot of psychological thoughts that go into a cover design, or there's a lot of thoughts that go into the psychological what am I trying to say? What Clay, help me out.
There's
There's
a
a lot
lot
of psychology, thank you,
yeah.
involved in what buyers experience when they look at a cover and what ultimately helps them decide to buy. I think that's what I was trying to say. Can you help me reframe that,
Well, and it's
Clay?
both science and art. There's a process to it, and there are rules that can be broken, but you don't always want to break the rules. And the rules are there for a reason. And so the rules are the science part of it, but there is also an art in that you're trying to connect emotionally. A cover has 2 seconds to grab someone's attention. If it doesn't, they're going to go on. They're either not going to pick up the book off the shelf, they're not going to click on it, they're going to go on to something else. And it's a very crowded market, which means that your book has to stand out. And we're competing, especially as self-publishers, we're competing against all of these traditionally published companies with design staffs and lots of money to throw at design. And so it's one of those things where if we're going to compete, we really have to get this piece right. And cover design is huge in terms of sales and marketing.
So with that thought, I think that's a great transition into the presentation that we have prepared for you guys. I'm going to share my screen here. I will just go ahead and say, I'm going to throw Claire under the bus here. He had nothing to do with the design of this, but we collaborated on the content. I suck at PowerPoint, so if something is messed up, it's my fault. That's really what this is about. It's my fault if there's a glitch, okay? So what we're going to be discussing today is creating a book cover that sells, because frankly, we're here to sell books. For me, this is a business, not a passion project. Clay, you would agree, I would hope. that we're kind of in this for a reason?
It's both. And, you know, if you write a book and nobody buys it, you know, what's the point of putting all that effort into it? And so, cover design marketing is really what takes what you've done and yeah, takes it to the masses. And that's where you,
And now everyone knows you're a better person than me, but that's okay.
well,
They already do.
you know, actually making money is not a bad thing after all the
Well,
hours.
I mean, to your point, like, you know, if you create a book for a passion, cool, but if no one sees it, I mean, you got to get it out in front of people, and a good cover is going to help you do that. So let's dive in. If I can figure out how to do this. Oh, here we go. Okay. So here's some of the covers that Clay and I have designed. Just to kind of give you an example of what we like to do, kind of our styles. This is just a collage of both of our work. So again, your cover has one purpose, and that is to sell your book. And Clay and I are gonna take turns here. I'll click
Well, and
through
I
for
just
you.
want to add too, a lot of people think like, oh, you know, they get weird about the selling aspect and the making money aspect, but I think it purely comes down to the fact that if people aren't buying your book, then it's not having an impact. It's not entertaining. It's not educating. It's not inspiring. It's not doing any of the things that you wanted it to do when you wrote it. And so selling is a good thing. It will help you make more books and have more impact and, you know, and do the things you want to do. It's a good thing.
Oh, you know, before you said it'll help you create more books, I was thinking exactly that. You know, bringing in money and having cash flow is imperative to the creation of more books, especially as independent publishers. You know, you're funding the illustrations, the editing, the printing, everything else, marketing, etc. And if you're not selling your books, your capital is gonna not exist at some point. So
just like any other company, whether it's a, you know, a company that's making gobs of money or whether it's a charity or a nonprofit, if they don't have a business model that is sustainable, their work stops happening. And so the same is true with books. If you do not have some sort of sustainable business model that will allow you to sell and make more books, then you won't, and it'll stop and it'll end there. So
well, my business plan has 2 words: get rich.
that's right.
Ah, crap, I'm in the wrong business. I gotta go.
Yeah, right. That's why
All right. Do you want to
to
start, Clay, or do you want me to run through the slide?
Sure.
And then
Yeah, I
next
can
one?
start. Why don't we can tag team back and forth. So one of the first things we want to ask, or that maybe you should be asking yourself when you're coming to your book cover, is what do you want to communicate? Again, remember, you have 2 seconds to get the reader's attention, and there has to be a communication that happens there. You want them to look at your book and immediately know something, and ideally have a reaction, an emotional reaction to what they've seen on your cover. So there's different ways to go about that, and we'll talk about that. But there's you want to communicate a little bit about your story, the themes of your book, that sort of thing. But then the second piece, go ahead,
There you
Katie, I'll
go.
let you pass on.
How about we just do all these and you can
Oh,
talk
we
about
can-
There you go.
But you want to take the second one?
Oh, sure. So we need to discuss what feeling you want to convey. So, for example, if you have a book that is targeting, you know, if the book is about a caregiver's love for the child whom they're reading to, you're going to want to convey a softness of love, right? If the book is funny, you want to convey humor. If the book is intended to be scary or overcoming fear, then you're going to want to convey that. But your feeling that you are conveying needs to match with your ultimate goals for the book.
And this is where, you know, it doesn't have to be positive feelings. It can be fear. It can be even anger, as long as it's not off-putting. And so there's a fine line there. And I've seen some covers that try to express those emotions, but they do it in a way that kind of makes the reader cringe. You want the reader to be drawn in, and those negative feelings, whether it's, you know, a sense of fear or a sense of anger, can be used for that. But it's a matter of doing that in a way is still drawing your reader in. But the one thing you don't want to do is for your reader to feel nothing. If they just look at it and it's like, oh, that's a nice cover, looks pretty, but I don't really, there's no, I don't care about it beyond that, then the cover has failed to do its job.
So we're going to conceptualize your cover's composition. And what that means is you have to think about the, you know, something simple as where you're putting the text, how that illustration is going to interact with the title treatment, how, you know, where are the credits going to go, the author and illustrator's name. So if you start to conceptualize that, and you really think about, first of all, if your cover has 2 words or your title has 2 words, that is a lot different than a title that has 6 words. So making sure that you have ample space for your title and the illustration to convey those messages are important to think about before you have the illustrator work on the cover artwork.
One of the things that that I harp on in our Facebook group that we run is when you're working on your cover composition, title comes first. A lot of times there's the instinct to start with your character or your illustration, and actually that's secondary. The first thing that you want is your title, because you want your reader to walk away remembering your title. And so it shouldn't be small, shouldn't be a secondary design element. It really needs to be the primary design element on the page. The character or the illustration is there to communicate the mood, or, you know, a little bit about the story, that sort of thing. But the first thing that you're doing is making sure that your reader knows your title, and so it really needs to be primary. And that's where we'll get into some more of this, but the actual design of the title is pretty critical. I'll see a lot of covers where somebody comes with a very beautiful illustration, and then it looks like they brought it into InDesign or Photoshop, and they basically selected a font and typed the title at the top, and that's it. And there's no design to it. There's no integration with that. We'll get into more of that in a bit. But it's really important to conceive of the entire composition as one piece, where the title, the illustration, all the elements are working together.
And so that's where planning your illustration comes into play. You conceptualize your cover, and then you actually make a plan for your illustration rather than just kind of winging it. Because when you wing it, you're really left with having your title be a secondary thought and having to fit it in rather than it being a cohesive plan to move forward. And then this is probably a little out of order, but when you think about what you want to communicate, you also need to consider how to communicate with your buyer. How do you convey those feelings? How do you communicate what the book is about? How do you evoke an emotion when you have 2 seconds, or even just, you know, even less than that, when they're scrolling through Amazon and you have a thumbnail size, and they're passing you even more quickly than that potentially. I didn't mean to jump ahead, Clay. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to those last 2 things?
No, the one side point, we're talking mostly about covers today, but the point you made about planning your illustrations really needs to continue throughout the entirety of your book, where the illustrations need to leave room for the text of your book, the copy that's going to be placed on the pages. And that's something that's a kind of a rookie mistake I've seen made a lot of times, where the illustrator will essentially fill the whole spread with illustration and not leave a space or a hole in that illustration where the text can go. And that's something that really needs to be thought through ahead of time. Another thing we'll hit on again later, but is incorporating a designer early on in the process, so that your designer, the author, the illustrator are working together to create this final product. But we'll touch on that later.
Right, and it's important to remember that we are a team between the author, the illustrator, and the designer. The point of the designer is to make this look like it all came from one brain, and you can only do that if you're all working together. But we're going to get into each of these points a lot more in depth here. So let's dive deeper. So what do you want to communicate? So just get a little bit more in detail about that. These are the things that you should think through. What is your story about? What is the feeling the readers will experience? Are they going to experience fear and overcoming that fear? Are they going to experience sadness? There's a lot of books out right now about losing a loved one. Are they going to experience an overwhelming feeling of love as they read through beautiful words that are meant to express feelings and love for the child that's being read to. And then what makes this book worthy of someone's attention? So we need to think through those types of things in order to come up with the best plan for what to communicate on your cover.
I think a good metaphor here, or a similar example, is like when you see a trailer for a new movie or a TV show, you walk away feeling like, oh, I can't wait to experience that. I can't wait to go see that movie, watch that show, play that video game, whatever. But those trailers are meant to capture your attention and give you a sense of what you're going to experience when you see the whole thing. So they're giving you a snippet, and a cover for your book is basically doing the same thing. You want to communicate what your reader is going to experience and get them excited about that experience, so that they are willing to pick up the book, to purchase the book.
And to your point, that's a great analogy. Just one other thought there. They always pick the best parts of the movie to put in the trailer.
Right. They ruin it, right?
Always the best jokes. It's always the most exciting scenes. And that is something that really should translate in the same way as on a book cover. That was a really good analogy, Clay. I see. This is why you're my friend. I forced Clay to be my friend. He did not have a choice. I said, Clay, you're going to be my best friend. And I was aggressive about that for years. Just so you know, like I'm that person because he's such a cool guy. Okay, so this might seem redundant, but this is like a checklist for you to think through when you're planning your cover. Having a plan for your cover is critical. So again, what feelings do you want to convey? Warm, happy, cheerful, happy, anxiety, suspense, conflict, or even what's the ultimate resolution that that's going to happen in your book. And I'll get into it. I have a great example using my own book cover for this part right here, the ultimate resolution, because that's what I decided to convey in my book. But it's okay to give away those types of things on the cover, because again, the point of your book is to sell your book. The ultimate resolution can also be a way to convey a feeling while sharing with your potential buyer or reader that there is a happy resolution to this story. So I have a good example of this later in our presentation of my own book cover, where I decided to show the resolution, and I'll kind of walk you through my thought processes with that for my own book cover. But the feeling that you want to convey is absolutely critical to actually selling your book.
And there's no right answer here. And you'll see covers that do both of these. Some that show that point of tension, a conflict. Others that do show the resolution. And I think that is something that has to be considered for each book. What is going to sell this the best? And each book has a little different focus. I have one book coming out where I'm going to use the point of conflict as the cover, and it's more humorous. But I think the humor in that conflict is going to work best for the cover. I have another one that I'm working on where I'm using the resolution as the cover, and so it really, I think, depends on what you're wanting to capture and what will attract your audience the most. So.
What will give them that feeling? What will sell the book?
Yeah.
So when we talked about, and I went into this a little bit too in depth on the last slide, but conceptualizing your cover and planning your cover, like I said, title placement, it is even okay at this stage, because you're already going to be working with a cover designer before your illustrator works on your cover design. We'll get into that later. For you to have this conversation with your cover designer to match a font with the illustration style prior to your illustrator working on the design or working on the illustration. And now, again, I'll show you an example of this later, but fonts have different sizes. Fonts have different widths. You need a certain amount of space for one font, whereas another font, you don't need the same amount of space for. So choosing a font, or at least having an idea of the size of the font is also helpful. Not imperative, but it's very helpful to have at this stage. Like Clay said, your illustration choice, what point that what the illustration is that's going to convey the right messaging that will sell your book. Start thinking through that. Minimalizing text. What I meant by that is there is such a thing as having too much text on the cover. you want to try and eliminate all the text that you don't absolutely have to have on your cover in order to sell your book. Some people put way too much. And so it's really what is the least amount of text that you can have in order to sell your book? Because again, you only have so much space. You have a thumbnail in a lot of cases that people are glancing at, and you need it to be legible. One focal point, and we'll get into more of that later too, and the interaction and cohesiveness between the title and the art, which is something that I really enjoy. And you'll see in a lot of traditionally published books how the title and the artwork actually interact with one another.
And that,
anything out there?
yeah, the interaction is so key. And as you mentioned earlier, Katie, you want the cover to feel like it was created by a single mind, even though there may be 3 different people involved in the process, and that it is one cover, not an illustration with text slapped on top of it. And that does require a careful font choice, and the fonts usually I think we'll get into this a little bit, but font choice should actually complement your illustration style, and certain fonts work good with certain styles and other fonts do not, and so that's a very important selection. And then just another point, we'll probably circle back on this with some of our examples, but minimalizing text. Let me just emphasize here, because we'll emphasize it again, especially as a starting out author, as independent author, nobody knows your name and nobody cares what your name is. Put your name small toward the bottom. It doesn't need to have illustrated by, written by. I mean, you can, but a lot of times that is just adding text to your cover. And I'm of the mindset that I suggest just putting the names of the author illustrator toward the bottom of the cover and out of the way so that they're visible, but that's really all they should be. Your name as a starting author is not a selling point for the book. You're not Michael Crichton or somebody like that who's
Everybody knows my name.
Yeah, right. So so that's where the title is. One of the things we'll talk about too with regards to the title is in regards to the whole cover really is design hierarchy, where the bigger elements or the more important elements are bigger, they're brighter, they're clearer on your cover, and the less important elements are going to be toward the edges. They will be not as saturated, not as bright. They may be a lot smaller, and so that is an important thing that a designer brings to cover design, is creating that hierarchy. So at immediate glance, the reader, even if they don't think this through, the reader can tell what are the important elements, and you're guiding their mind as they and their eye as they look at your cover. All right, back to you, Katie.
Traffic is terrible on 995 right now. There's a pile up. Sorry. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, how can we communicate this? Well, there are lots of ways that you can communicate feeling and emotion with just simple things like just color, facial expressions, the colors. Did I already say that? The font choice. We're going to get into font choices and what kind of personalities they have. And then just the scene, the colors that you choose, even for the sky, everything will convey a mood and a feeling overall, just a feeling. So every single decision you make, from fonts to colors to the expression on your characters' faces, is going to matter a lot with conveying these messages. And then let's go to the next one. So what do you want to communicate? So this feels redundant. What does your buyer need to know about your book? That's a good one to talk about. So again, minimalizing all the other like static, what do they need to know in order to make a buying decision? And that's what you should start with in terms of deciding on the illustration and deciding on your composition, is what do they need to know about your book? And which part of your story will sell your book the best? Sorry for the redundancy there, but it's worth bringing these up again, just because, again, the point is to sell your book. And Clay brought this up before, where he's got one that shows the point of conflict. He's got one coming out that shows the point of resolution. I chose to kind of show like a combination, and I'll go through that when I get to this part in the slide. But which part will sell your book? Do you want to tap on any of these things, Clay?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to be able to take a step back and be your your own critic in these situations. It's kind of like when you're editing your book, when you're doing writing, you're constantly editing your own work. That's not to say that you don't need an editor or you don't need a designer, but one of the things you also need to do is be able to, as objectively as possible, look at your own work and say, is this good or does this still need work? And I think with a cover, you're coming at it saying, okay, if this was somebody else's book, if this was not my book, do I have a reason to pick this book up off the shelf? Do I have a reason to buy it? Am I giving the reader that reason? And if you're not, then your cover's not there yet. And so being able to evaluate it in that capacity, and being able to say, I'm not really giving, this is a nice cover, it looks nice, it's kind of cute, have a cute illustration, but I'm not giving my reader any compelling reason to pick this book up and read it or buy it, then we're not there yet. So
I think the other thing too that sometimes I see people worry about is like giving away the ending of the story or spoilers. But I think it's important to remember that children's picture books are not meant to be read once. The best picture books are read again and again and again and again. And children typically are not the ones doing the buying. So if there is a little bit of a spoiler in there, depending on what it is and depending on your story, that might actually be a good thing because parents know what to expect. But above all, you want it to inspire that curiosity that, you want them to open the book and actually experience it. And so if you look at the cover and it's just a character standing there doing nothing and your title doesn't give anything away either, we have no idea what this book is about. And so there's also no compelling reason to learn more about it. When the next book, literally the book beside it or the book one scroll down has all of those things.
And
Right.
as a parent, you want to make sure that this book is not going to leave your children sad or anxious. And so sometimes showing the resolution and giving away the ending will help your buyer feel confident buying that book for their child.
Mhm.
So that's something else that you have to consider is
Sense
who's
of
buying this book.
resolution, that's where that comes in. Vicky, that's such a good point about, and this goes beyond cover design to book craft, but the whole idea of rereadability for children's books is, other books you pick it up once, you're unlikely to read like a novel more than once, maybe your favorite novel, but most novels you read once and you're done. But children's books, if they only get read once, they're an unsuccessful children's book. It has to be written and crafted in a way that the children and parents are both going to want to read it again and again. So just
I don't know what you mean, Clay. I read books when my kids run around over and over and over again, and definitely don't read children's
right.
books are that. All right. So let's keep.
Aha,
Oh,
more.
redundancy. I love it. Sorry, I didn't mean to click that again.
Right.
So again, just the emotions. We've probably talked this to death because we're going to talk about feelings again here, but it's all about the feelings. If they have no connection to your cover, they are not going to buy it. In the same way that business is done between people and not businesses, you're more likely to buy something from someone that you relate to and that you like. It's the same thing with books. You're going to buy a book that you feel connected to on some level, or you feel might resolve an issue that you're experiencing at home with your, you fill in the blank, but the feeling that your cover evokes is absolutely critical. What were you going to say, friend?
I had nothing. No, I'm good.
Oh, I thought you said, I thought I interrupted you. My ADHD got the best of me again. Okay. All right. So again, what emotion? This is redundant. Actually, Vicky, I remember this being redundant last time we did this with you. I'm sorry.
It's redundant because it's important. So just
It's important. Okay. We're just making sure you get it. Okay. So color palette, illustration scene, expression on your characters, fonts. All right. We've already gone through that. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. How can you create a great cover composition? So we were talking about visualizing and planning your cover composition. Well, sometimes you're doing this on your own if you haven't yet hired a designer to help you with this part. And so we know our job here today is to educate you on how to create a good cover. And so part of that would be how do you compose one that is going to accomplish all of these things. So like Clay said, the title comes first. First thing you should do is is decide on title placement, how big you want it to be, a general idea of placement. If you can even decide or come close to the font decision that you're going to make, that would be huge. And then the illustration gets worked in around the title. And of course, everything can be tweaked. And I'll show you an example later of how I had a plan for a title. I made sure there was space for it, but then I ultimately decided that there was a stronger way to compose the cover. And that's okay too. But as long as you're planning and you know that this is the plan moving forward with through the process. So a single focal point is going to be a lot more impactful than a cover jam-packed with crap. All right. So there's a natural Z in the way that people read. And this comes back to we read you know, left to right, and then we move down the line. The same thing happens naturally when we are looking at a cover design. So the first thing you're going to look at is the top left, then you're going to move somewhere to the middle, and then down to the bottom left, and then to the right, where we would open the book. We'll go into that a little bit more in a little bit. So adding movement is always a helpful way to make your book feel like
Energy.
yeah, energy. So it doesn't feel static and or stagnant or dull, muted, something. So adding movement can do a lot with adding emotion and creating a sense of I need to be a part of this without actually having you know anybody complete that thought.
Well, and you can even see it. It's kind of funny on this slide right here. You've got little puffs of clouds, and you've got little motion on the wings, little glow coming off of that light bulb there. So there's just little things that instead of it just being a still life drawing, there's a sense of energy, a sense of movement, a sense that if this was animated, things would be happening. Even the gears would be turning. So all of these things contribute to that sense that this is a lively, even though it's a static page, which you know, it's hard to compete.
Well designed though, right, Clay? It's well designed.
Well designed, yes, right. But you know, even when you're not competing with animations, you know, animated films and that kind of stuff, and that you don't have that benefit of motion, so you have to in a sense infer it. You're basically implying that there is motion and using little details in the illustrations and the layout to do that.
So I just realized that people may not understand what that means. So movement might be leaves blowing, or you know, a skirt blowing in the wind, or hair blowing, or wind. You can draw wind. You can have trees moving. Anything that doesn't feel like it is clip art. Make it feel like static, boring clip art. You want to bring in some energy into your illustration so that they're not just static.
And you can also do it with design, and Katie is ridiculously good at this, and in taking the text that it can just be plain text, and she has an example we'll get to in a little bit, but taking plain text and adding energy and life to it so that it enhances the it communicates what's being what's happening in the book and what's happening in the story. And so the text itself can take on some of that life, and we'll give you some examples.
Like funny, did you know this was the next one, the interactive title?
No, I'm
That
just
was really good.
Yeah.
You should play. You should, you know, maybe tell me what the lottery numbers are. Okay, so an interactive title. This kind of goes in line with having your title and your illustration interact with one another. This can be something simple as, you know, like, my gosh, I wish. You know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it because it's worth showing this. So do you see this? This is a good example of the character interacting with the title. So this, she's Molly's Magical Tooth. I took this tooth and I made it larger, and I had her reaching up for the tooth as an O in the cover, and I think that makes it stronger. And then less is more. To go back to like less text, one focal point, don't overdo it with illustration. If people feel like there's just too much to look at, it makes them uncomfortable subconsciously, and they're going to click off of it. If it almost feels like there's just too much going on, they're not sure what to focus on first, they just ignore it and they keep scrolling. They look at something else.
And don't feel like you have to include all of your characters on the cover. that's a common mistake, and the desire is to, you're so excited about these characters that you've created for your book, and you want to communicate them and want people to see them. You're gonna have to leave some of that to the inside of the book to do that, and that really does come back to the single focal point.
And then, we like we had talked about before, and as you well know, you read left to right, and the book opens from the right to the left. So when you lead the eyes to the right, you are subconsciously helping your reader want to open the book. So if you'll notice, most children's books, they should be all, but most children's books will have whatever movement leading to the right. Characters will always face to the right. Whatever movement you have, whether it's wind blowing or leaves blowing, will typically go to the right. And so that's really important, and that's not a conscious thing that people consider, but it absolutely helps. When it goes to the left, you want to leave the book closed for some reason. And then cohesiveness is really just the marrying. No, that's not right. The you want the title, text treatment, the design, and the illustration to really look like it was created by one brain, even though it's typically not done by one person. Okay, so here I'm gonna just show you, just because I have this. I don't always have this sketch. For my book, When the Sky Roars, I know I wanted to convey fear, curiosity, bravery, resolution, and that there was dinosaurs, because I knew that there would be, I knew that having dinosaurs in my book would be a selling point, but I didn't want to give away to the reader that there was dinosaurs, but I wanted to give it away well enough to the buyer, if that makes sense. So I wanted to make it subtle. So I sketched this design with the plan that my cover, that my title would go right here, that you can see there's plenty of space for the title. My characters are showing fear on their faces, both of them. They're here, keep clicking. So there's a single focal point, plenty of space for the text. This is not the font I ended up using, but it was pretty close. And movement, I knew that I was going to add movement swirling around him and then going to the right. And then overall direction, we're looking towards the right. The movement, you can see these plants here are all leaning toward the right. This is movement here. There's rain, and then the wind that I added all goes to the right. I wish I had. I don't know why I didn't, but I didn't include the final. So if you don't know my book, I will show you that later when I stop with this presentation. So the stormy sky, like the colors, I knew that would evoke the right kind of moody feeling of fear, but his stance is that of bravery. And then I added a dinosaur tail from the book art to show well enough to the buyer that there's a dinosaur in here without actually saying it. And then my name at the bottom. I did not make it this big. Okay, so here's a good example of good composition. You've got the Z. This is what we were talking about before. We start at the left, go down to the characters, and then to the right, you see their names are down here. There's no credits, or there's no roles, I should say. There's credit, but there's no roles. So to Clay's point, I will always advise my clients to leave off the written by and illustrated by on the cover. You can always add roles on the title page on the interior of the book, or even on the dust jacket if you're going to have one. But it's better to leave off that text if you can help it here. So they've got a single focal point. There's movement, and then everything goes towards the opening of the book.
No, I think this is a great example of that, and yeah, you really get that sense of motion. There's a clear emotion communicated. The joy and the color palette plays into that. The font is such a good match to the illustration, and helps enhance that. So yeah, there's just a lot that works.
And you can't help but smile when you see the kid with their arms up,
Yep.
With their eyes closed from just being so happy, and the telescope. Is that a telescope? No. What is that? Is that considered a handheld telescope?
It's a handheld telescope, yeah.
All right, cool. I didn't mess that up. All right, but they just look happy, and you can't help but feel a sense of joy when you look at this. And then the title really pairs well with that feeling of happiness, because of course this is one of those books where the reader is expressing love and a wish of happiness to the child being read to. And then, less works really well here. And I hope that you understand what we mean by less is more, when you really have just a single focal point and, names and a simple title. It's really, this is not oversaturated with artwork, even though the interior illustrations are so detailed. She did a really great job. You don't see that on the cover because they didn't want it to be overwhelming, and they did that right.
Yeah. And if you go back to that just one second, back to the idea of visual hierarchy. Here you can see it in play very well. The title is your biggest thing. It's the most important element, and it's the largest visual element on the page. The second thing is the kids in the basket, in the box, I guess it is. And they are, see how the color is so much different than the background behind it. So they pop off of the page, and your eye is drawn there. The rest of the colors, the blues and the pinks, are pastels. They kind of fade into the background, but your eye is drawn to the detail and the more saturated colors of the kids. And then the names at the bottom, they are small. They are just a clean. They're not drawing attention to themselves. They're there, but they're not demanding attention, because they're less important to the reader.
I love this cover. It sells really well in the stores too.
Hmm.
I stock Michael's books, not as well as yours though, Clay. Not one book could compete with your book.
All right.
I think I told you this. Your one book accounted for 7% of my sales last year. Isn't that wild?
It's just crazy.
Okay, so let's talk about fonts. You may not have ever had this realization, but every font has a personality, and we'll give you two really good examples here. So this font, The Kids at the Carnival. Looking at this, what's the book about? It's a children's book, and it's probably a fun day at the carnival, right? What do you think this is about, Clay?
I think it's just
so obnoxious. Sorry.
I think it's fun, but I'm scared to know what you're gonna do next.
Right, yeah.
How does it make you feel?
Playful, cotton candy, suddenly, yeah, horror movie.
Okay, this is literally the same placement, but a different font. So the feeling is just so different. This looks like a rated R movie, and one I would never let my little kids watch or read. And this looks playful. And so it's the same title, same placement, but different fonts have different personalities, and choosing your fonts is critical to conveying your message.
Well, just imagine that one on the left was in red, like.
Oh, I know, or with like a little bit of like blood splatters in the background. Ugh.
Instead of balloons and bright colors and yellow.
Like popped balloons, or even worse, balloons with blood dripping. Oh my gosh. Actually, that's a cool book. We should write that one, Clay. Anyway, I'm kidding. Okay, so lots of times I get questions about font pairing. Do you get that question a lot too, Clay? So
yes, all the time.
I typically like to pair a very simple, or Clay, I said, Clay, it's not a fancy font. What's it called? And he said, I think it's called a display font. That's what I call it. And that sounded a lot more professional than fancy font. So we went with that.
But the idea is a fancy font. So a font with a lot of personality.
Right. Something with personality.
And drawn, yeah, all that's curly cues, whatever that it's not something you want to read a whole paragraph in. That's a display font as opposed to
yeah, it's something that's going to bring in the message and convey the mood and the personality that you're trying to convey without using it throughout. And so typically I will use a display font like that, and I will pair it with a body font or something that is a lot more simple. And you don't want to do two display fonts. I see this a lot. When people choose two fonts that are both busy or both have texture and they don't really complement one another, that's always a design fail. So if you're going to choose a display font that really pairs well with the mood you're trying to convey, you want to pair that with something that's a lot more simple, but still conveys the same kind of mood, if that makes sense. So you're not going to pair, like if we go back to this, this we would pair with a bouncy and very legible plain font. Whereas this we might pair with something completely different, and I can't think of what that might be right now, but something maybe a little bit scratchier but still plain. I don't know. But still, you know, what you pair it with is really important. And I don't know if that was actually helpful, but do you have anything you want to add there, Clay?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's going to be one font that most of your text is rendered in, and it's a readable font. It's something that it may not be too simple. That, you know, I still a lot of times will use a font that looks like a handwritten font for the interior text of my books, but it still is pretty clean. It's very legible, very readable, especially for younger eyes. And one of the things that we should probably mention here, like on Michael's cover that you showed, on my own cover, for this, I know at least, I've chosen a very scripty font. There's a discouragement against that a lot of times because kids have trouble reading scripty fonts. They may not know cursive. They're just beginner readers. They don't know that. I think an exception can be made for the title, and the reason we can do that is because, again, your book buyer is generally an adult, a parent, a teacher, that sort of thing, and so they're the ones that you're really grabbing the attention with the title. But inside the book, you want your font to be very readable. You want it to be something that a kid can pick up without any problems. And so there are certain fonts where certain letters are rendered in weird ways or have just unusual shapes to them, and that makes it hard to read. But one of the things that you'll probably end up doing too, and I try to do this, is if I use a display font for the title, then a secondary font for some of the other text on the cover, well, I'll try to use that same font inside the book as well. So you're not continuing to add on more fonts.
You really want to limit to 2 if you can.
2 is usually, yeah, 2 is great, maybe 3, but really you don't want to go beyond that for the most part. And it gives them, again, a cohesiveness, not just to your cover, but to the whole book, where it feels like it's all of one piece. So
Absolutely. I get a lot of clients that kind of had someone else do it first. I end up redoing more books than I end up doing from start to finish, from scratch. And a lot of what I see is 3 or 4 fonts being used in a book, and it's really too much. And this is just from inexperienced book designers, or authors hiring inexperienced book designers, or just hiring a book formatter, which is different than a book designer. Anyway, so while we're talking about fonts, there are some unspoken rules here for, when you are adding text to your cover. And again, we're going to talk you through these so you kind of know what to look for, or if you're going to attempt to do this yourself to start, maybe you'll nail it. Some people just have a natural gift for this, but do not overuse effects. A rule of thumb that Clay actually was really good at articulating is, if you notice the effect before the words, you've done too much. Cover fonts should not clash with interior fonts. So something that I tend to do, and Clay, I'm not sure if you do this too, but the display font, or the fancy font, and the body font, I will use both on the interior of the book. Usually, if the display font is a font that children can read and goes well with the body font. And if you're pairing them together, they should never not go well together. But there's been a handful of occasions where I used fonts that were great for the cover that just did not work well for the interior. And that's when like a third font will come into play. But I tried to add in like emphasis to the text on the interior of the book by bringing in that display font to emphasize those words. And if you want, I can show you. You actually can't tell me if you want it, so maybe I'll just do it later. But I'll show you what I mean by that. Because it's really good to kind of think through your whole book, not just your cover, when you're doing your cover design.
The other instance where I'll use an additional font, so I'll use a display font for the title, and maybe for some headings inside the book or something like that. I'll use a font for the actual text of the book, and then sometimes I'll have a third font for, what do you call it, the business text. So like the copyright page, the blurb on the back of the book, or the flaps on the inside cover. And that usually is just a clean serif font, something a little bit more professional looking, and maybe less
What's your favorite font? Papyrus?
Papyrus or Comic Sans. Do you use Comic Sans for everything?
Okay, Clay hates Papyrus and Comic Sans. There's a joke there, you guys.
Yeah, speaking of those two fonts are considered overused. They come pre-installed on Windows machines and have for
You
about
won't
20
use
years.
them if you want Clay to like you.
And so they're not inherently bad fonts, but they've been overused and misused so many times that
Well,
they're usually a clear indication of amateur design. And so that's my main reason for suggesting against those. There's so many great fonts out there. Don't pick Comic Sans, don't pick Papyrus.
yes, but if being overused and unoriginal and amateurish is not enough for you, we won't like you if you use those fonts. Just kidding. Actually, while we're on this topic, my favorite place to buy fonts is creativemarket.com. Clay, do you have a fave we can share?
I don't have probably a favorite. There's a few font creators that I like. Kimberly Guesswein, GESWEIN.com. She's a fantastic fonts creator.
You can buy all of her fonts in one bundle too if you go to teacherspayteachers.com. That's how I got all of her fonts.
Oh, does she do that too? Okay, because I know what's her name? Jen Jones, helloliteracy.com. She also sells
I
her
love her fonts too, yeah.
and I think they're for a commercial license, it's only $5 a font, and so it's really quite reasonable, and a lot of kid-friendly fonts, a lot of fun stuff that teachers use in classrooms, but that also work really well in a book setting. And then there's one other that I use, Hanoded, HANODED fonts.com, hanodedfonts.com, and
I'm gonna write that down. Hanoded.com.
Hanoded, HANODED fonts.com, and he's one of my favorite font creators, and just has a lot of great fonts. And again, fonts are, you may end up spending $20 or something like that on a commercial license, but it's such a minor purchase compared to everything else in the cost of creating a book, that it's just not worth kind of cutting corners. But if you do use a font, make sure you do have commercial access, commercial rights to use it that way. Some are in Creative Commons license, and so they are open, basically an open source font that you can use freely, sometimes with attribution. So you got to check things like that. Just a reminder to check those details. There's usually a license agreement of some sort attached to the font. So,
or you could just wing it like me. I'm just kidding. I swear I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Yeah, I really am. I always make sure I have a license. Okay, so choose fonts that work with your illustrations. So this is important. So important. So like if the illustration has like a sketchy feel, then I'm gonna use a font that has texture, that feels sketchy. And by sketchy, I don't mean like shady. I mean sketchy like it was sketched, like it's kind of rough. I'm gonna choose a font that has like a rough feel in the same way. Or if like I just went through choosing a font for my next book called Oh My Dragon's Hungry, and it's a dragon book, but the colors, the illustration style is like very Disney, and so I wanted something that conveyed a dragon, but also complemented the illustrations. And so I found a font that I think works really well with that. But the illustration style matters a lot with choosing your font. You don't want them to clash. Again, one brain. Illustrations and design look like they came from one brain, and that is a big part of our job as designers, is choosing the font that will complement your illustrations. Anything you want to add to that, friend?
Well, I will say when it comes to choosing a font, I will usually go through 20 or 30 fonts before I settle on one. And so I really evaluate a lot. So I will, I just did this for a book I'm working on right now, where I was choosing a body font, and there are so many options, and they each have just slight differences, and they read differently and they communicate differently. As Katie said, each has a personality. And so spend a lot of time just actually taking a page with an illustration, putting the text in the page and rendering it in each of those fonts, and then kind of comparing them next to each other. And that's really the only way to evaluate it effectively, is to really mock up and see what it looks like in context.
Wait a minute. So you don't design the whole book in one font and then decide you don't like it and redo it like
Right,
me?
no, yeah.
Okay. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm not. Sorry. Um, consider your audience. So a lot of consideration goes into the audience. So if we're designing a book that is for children, that are like in kindergarten, first grade, we know that they're learning to write A's and G's as a single stacked letter. And by that, I mean, it doesn't have the little fancy second.
Tail, like the tail thing.
Yeah, the thing that goes over. So I call those double stacked A's and double stacked G's. I'm not sure if that's like a technical term or not, but I try really hard to choose fonts for the interior, especially. I will totally fudge this on the cover. But if I have the option and I really love a font, it's perfect in every way. Maybe I might capitalize those letters for that effect on the interior of the book, just to avoid double stacked A's and G's, or I'll just avoid fonts like that entirely. But we want kids to more easily be able to read the text, by reading it how they learn to write it, if that makes sense. So this is not like a golden rule here. This is just something that a lot of people pay attention to, and I think it's worth paying attention to it. If I can avoid it, I do. If the font is too good not to use it, then I'll fudge it. But it's just something to consider if it's worth it or not to you. Anything you want to add to that, Clay?
One thing that gets talked about sometimes is font usage for dyslexic kids and readers. And that is something to consider. And there are certain fonts where they read better for those with dyslexia. There are fonts also designed specifically for that. The problem is that it it doesn't have a very distinct look. I know one of the things you did, Katie, is actually generate a version of your book specifically for dyslexic readers with fonts that are geared for that.
I did, and I was going to actually bring that up later.
Okay. Sorry.
No, I'm glad that you did. I'm glad that you did, because it's important. So if you really want to tailor your books to a dyslexic reader, you can always create a second edition, a dyslexia font edition, and offer that option as a print on demand, or if you're selling a lot of them, you can of course do an offset print. But personally, as a designer, who for 12 years was married to somebody with dyslexia and can empathize with people with dyslexia, still the point of your book is to sell it. Okay. And so this is a very hard moral consideration, but at the end of the day, you can't create books for any children to read if no one's buying them. And the mood and the feeling and everything that that your cover conveys, it's important to choose the right fonts. And so I think the way I did it is a good way to do it. If you want to appeal to both audiences, like kids that have a hard time reading because they have dyslexia, or just the general public that doesn't experience those issues, I would just consider maybe that option rather than going full dyslexia font. Is that a fair way to phrase that?
I think it is, yeah. And that's why there's a case to be made for not using fonts like that, because you are trying to sell your book and reach a more general audience, but consider that audience as well. But that again, I think plays back into trying to use fonts that are a little bit simpler, and this is where the things like the A's and the G's for early readers become important, because it allows young eyes to be able to read those, read the text of your book more easily. So
sure. And you can also just add a little bit more space between your characters. That'll help too with children that have a hard time with reading. And I don't know if this will make sense to anybody but me, but when I know I've gotten the right font on that page, I know it. I feel it. I'm like, that's it. I don't have to look anymore. And you will know when it feels right. If you're still looking, you're still shopping for fonts. In the same way, if you're still shopping for boyfriends, you haven't found the right one. Sorry, I didn't mean to drop the mic there and turn the page. Sorry, go ahead. Do you have anything you want to add?
Not now. No, I'm good.
Sorry. I'm never gonna get invited back. Okay. So I get this question a lot. At what point should you add a book designer to your team? Now I will tell you that I've played all the roles. I was an illustrator. I've illustrated 3 books. I've been a graphic designer long before that. I'm an author. And now I strictly do book design in addition to just writing my own books. And I would tell you that the earlier you bring on, sorry, why am I jumping ahead? First of all, what is a book designer?
Good question, Katie. What is a book
What
designer?
is a book designer? A book designer is someone who takes your manuscript and your illustrations and they marry the two and bring them together in a cohesive book. They are deciding on fonts, they're deciding on the pagination, they're deciding on where to place the text and how to place the text, the typography. They are going to hand you a cohesive book with print ready files ready for you to hand to your printer. So that's what a book designer does. Anything you want to add to that?
No, other than this is a really different question for
This right here.
well, there's that, but yes, and that plays into that. But this is for a children's book versus a fiction, novel or a nonfiction book or something like that, where it's essentially just text on a page. And this gets to the point at the bottom here. The book designer is not the same as a book formatter, and formatting is just essentially taking the manuscript and slapping it in the pages. And there's a little more creative to it, process to it than that. But with a children's book, it really is a design aspect where you are taking the text, you are taking the illustrations, and you are marrying them together, and the sum of the whole should actually be greater than the sum of the parts. And so the way the book is designed, the way the text is laid out, should actually enhance the story, should tell a better story because of the way it's laid out. It should help bring out and draw attention to the right parts of the illustration.
And add to it.
Yes.
The way that you display the text on each page can help with the storytelling. It can help add to the illustration. It can help add the personality and what you're trying to convey to your reader. It can help with book progression and keeping people reading and turning the pages.
All that stuff.
It
Yep.
makes a big difference. Yeah. So to answer this question, and I'm going to actually pop out of this because I have a really good example of a book formatter versus a book designer.
Yep.
And I'm going to just run through that really quickly because I think it's worth showing the difference, because I get this question a lot, actually. Why are you charging, this much money when I got quoted this much as a book formatter? And there's a huge difference between those two jobs. And I don't agree that a book formatter is the right position for a children's book. A book formatter is the job for like a novel. And again, that's my opinion, so don't cancel me. Okay, so for best results, you want to enlist the help of a book designer early in the process. So when you are talking about storyboarding, you're sketching out your spreads, you want to make sure that your book designer has a look at that, or at least as part of the or even better, part of the conversation, to make sure that you're leaving ample space for the text on your pages. And just kind of get an idea of which parts of the text you really want to emphasize. You want this one like roar to be huge and take up a third of the page. And so those are things that really should be thought about early on in the process and not an afterthought, because if I'm getting illustrations that have no room for text, I'm very limited as a book designer to convey the story in the best way. And the same thing goes with the cover design. If you're enlisting the help of a book designer who can look at the illustration style and really start to pair and marry those fonts and help you plan your cover and communicate with your illustrator with you or for you, that's going to yield the best result. And so if there's nothing you want to add, I want to touch on the difference between the book designer and the formatter, and we can talk about that together too. Do you want to add anything to that, friend?
Nope, that was good.
Okay. Ooh, did I nail it? That's
Yeah, I think so.
okay. All right. So a book designer and a book formatter are very different. A book formatter is going to throw text on a page in a very plain way, probably going to use Comic Sans, but it's okay. And then they're going to hand you back print ready files. A book designer is going to do a lot more to the actual story. And so here, this is an example of a book that was given to me. This is what she had to start. This was a $300 book formatting job. As you can see, it's a very plain text. There's not a whole lot of personality here. They did change the color, which is more than a lot of book formatters do. But something as a book designer, this is what I'm noticing. That font is larger and has more space between lines than this font and space between lines. This text is smaller. So, details like that are also, first of all, good book design and good formatting, but often overlooked if you're skimping on book design. So this is just plain, plain, plain. And there's a reason why I'm skipping to the end here. So this was the end of the book. And a throw to her website. And this is how she displayed her other books. Okay, so then she asked me to help her out with this book. And this is the cover that I designed for her. Let me move this guy. And then this is the difference between a book. So this was POD. So this is going to look different than like an offset print. With print on demand, it starts book or page 1 starts on the right side. It's normally page 3. So here we have, this was my idea to create a mock-up of the book cover and use this as the title page. These little guys, this is what I think through as a book designer. I'm thinking through, who are these characters? What is this book about? What are we conveying with the story? And these guys are mischievous. For the birthdays, they are doing lots of crazy things. And so it would make sense that they would be carrying off the book in the title page. And so this is just an addition that I put in. I added this character here. I pulled him from another part of the story, her. And then this birthday Burkles matches this. I pulled this in from, this is a good, this is actually all the same font, but you can see I did a different color, and I made this word rainbow, and it's larger than this text. And I actually, all of these letters are their own individual layer, so that I can make them a little bit funkier. I twisted, turned them, and moved them around. So it's not just plain body text. I did more to this, quote unquote, plain body text to make it feel more like a display font. And the same thing
Back
goes.
there for just a second. So, I mean, this is where you really shine, Katie, but I think it's worth pointing out how this is a font with a lot more personality. It actually is a great match to the illustrations. It's just got a cuteness to it, even a mischievousness. And so I think it works really well with the illustrations. But if you look at it like over on the left side here, just as plain text, it reads pretty easily. It's as a plain font, it's still very readable, but then you can do stuff with it like you've done to add personality to it. And so it's got some of its own personality, but there's a lot you can do with it, and you do. So anyway, continue. There's more to
what am I trying to tell you? The typography is the fun part for me. So I tried to make this look like it was bubbling with the bubble. This page had a lot of text, but I tried to add some personality to it. But I want to show you the difference. So this word sprinkles in the last book was the same text, but I actually drew these in here to kind of create a font, if you will, with those sprinkles. And where's the other one? I guess I passed it. It doesn't matter. So I pulled in these characters and created these frames with actually, if you remember this page here, well, just kidding. This page here, this frame here, I used that frame and just changed the color, which you can do pretty easily in Photoshop if you know how to. And then I brought in these Burkles to introduce them, and I created this kind of showcase page for them. She didn't ask me to do that, but in my opinion, as a book designer, I want to make sure that this book is interesting and pretty and has something going on from cover to cover. And then this is how I displayed her books, rather than them just being in one, boring page like this. This just has a lot more, this is a lot more interesting to look at, and it's more likely people won't skip off of this page. And then this, again, these guys are mischievous. So mischievous, whatever. And so I thought it'd be fun to create this page where it looks like they were tearing a page in the book to disclose or display the copyright notice. And so that's the difference between a book designer and a book formatter. I hope that helped with just identifying the difference.
What you did there was interesting, because basically you have one font throughout that entire book, and you used that entire font in different ways. Even on the copyright page, it's still the same font. And but because of the if you choose a font that has that sort of flexibility, it can be used throughout like that, and it gives a very cohesive feel to the design throughout.
So here's another I want to show you real quick. So this is what we call a display font. And then for Ashley's book, I did use a third font here for the legal crap,
Mhm.
but I tried to emphasize different words in the story this way. Now this is the same font again, but every single one of these layers or letters are on a different layer, and I kind of did the same thing where I made it feel funky. And so throughout the book, there's a lot of consistency here. The first words and the last word in every line are done this same way, if you can see that. And so what we want here is for there to be some consistency. The text is always the same. Whenever there's a reference of the word dinosaur, it is brought in the exact same way. Fred is always in green and this exact way. So I think that it's really valuable to have these sorts of things because kids can identify and it'll help them actually remember the book, keep turning the pages. They're looking for these types of things. And again, it just makes it interesting. So this is not just plainly text typed onto the page. Each one of these letters is its own layer, and I kind of shifted around and sorted it up at the beginning and end of each line. So I don't know if that
Sort of
helps.
thing takes time, but it really, you can see, I think you can see how much value it adds to the overall.
It helps tell the story, and that's what I meant to say. Actually, I kind of got I pulled that up and then forgot my thought. But when no surprise, right? When I was going through that book, I was thinking about this dinosaur is mostly nice, but the thing is you can't wake up Fred. Fred is grumpy, and the kid just thinks he's nice, but he's a grumpy dinosaur. And if you wake up Fred, he ends up eating the kid at the end of the book and then spitting him out. Don't worry. But I wanted that to like kind of shakiness to be portrayed in the story as it moves on. And so those are the types of things that you should think about in the interior, but also on your cover. And I know that we kind of got off topic a little bit with the interior, but these are things that you should also think about because you want your interior and your cover to, again, look like it was the same frame. You don't want your cover to be stellar and then you open the book and it's a letdown. So you want to make sure that you're thinking through the whole book, not only your cover when you're thinking about your cover. Anything else you want to add before I continue?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it really is kind of like you don't want to be a bait and switch where your cover promises something that your book doesn't deliver, and that comes from the writing to the design to the illustrations. You want your cover to promise a lot, but you want your book to deliver even more, and so that's where it's important to write well, to have it edited, to really perfect it as much as you can, and then to have illustrations and design that really bring it all together.
Cool. I agree. You can't half you know what it.
How about it?
Half you know what. I'm gonna put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah,
Okay, so these are the roles. And I don't know if it's worth going into all of these things, but
We can just do an overview because I know you
yeah.
guys have got some really good examples too later.
Yeah, and we've already touched on a lot of these things. This is kind of just a visual, but this is how the illustrator, the book designer, and the author all kind of work together and what their individual roles usually are. This is not the way it has to be 100% of the time, but typically this makes for a really good working relationship between these three people. And so we can just leave this up on the screen for a second while we talk about it so you can review this. Do you want to add anything, Clay?
One thing I would say is that this is a self-publishing context. And so really the author circle is author/publisher, because you are, as a self-published author, you're really taking on the responsibilities that a publisher typically would, like hiring the illustrator, hiring designer, editors, that sort of thing. If you were with a traditional.
Yeah, for selling the product. Sorry.
Right. So you're exactly. So you're not only writing it, you're responsible for crafting the whole book and marketing it and all that sort of thing. So just to clarify that the roles that typically would be handled by a publisher are in the author circle here.
Right. And the author in this context really kind of oversees the whole project. where a publisher would in a traditionally published setting. They are giving direction to the illustrator and the book designer for what they want the final product to look like. And so as an author who doesn't have that kind of experience as a traditionally published book manager or whatever might be or might have, you really need to trust the recommendations of your book designer and your illustrator, and do your homework and your research on their qualifications and their type, what their final project or projects look like, to make sure that it's in line with your final vision for the project. And make sure that you guys are all communicating together, because if you don't have this type of experience that, Penguin Random House might have, someone who's publishing and managing the creation of these books, they've done, hundreds of books, and you've done maybe 1 or 2, 3, 5, 10 at the most, in most cases. And so you really want to make sure that you guys are working together and collaborating on these things. And this is a good display of how those relationships might collaborate together.
I had posted this in one of the Facebook book groups a while ago, but this was what I call the evolution of my cover for This I Know. The one on the left is simply my mock-up. I just grabbed some stock art off of the web and threw a title on top of it, kind of what I was picturing. And so this is what I gave to my illustrator. The feel that I wanted, and the posture, basically the composition. The middle one is her first pass at it, which is a very cute cover, and a lot of people said, "Oh, that's really cute. Why did you push it to the one on the right?" And the thing about the middle one is it was not the age bracket I was aiming for. It's a little too young and cutesy, and I wanted it to be a little bit more dramatic and eye-catching. And so I really nudged her to revisit it, and we actually aged up all of the characters a little bit, and in the way she was doing her illustrations, and we ended up with the one on the right. She even commented that she wanted the character's eyes open. Like, usually you want the reader to be able to make eye contact with your character on your cover, and generally that's a good rule of thumb. But I think here, and we actually saw it on Michael Wong's cover too, where the kids in the balloon have their eyes closed, and it's just kind of that gives that sense of joy, and so that's what I really want for. And in the end, we were really satisfied with where we landed. But this just gives you a sense of what your role as an author / publisher is. Like, you may have some ideas about what you want, and so the first step is communicating that. Maybe that's with words, maybe that's with a mock-up like I did here, but something so that your illustrator and or your designer have an idea of what you want out of the final cover and the final book. But then you also have to be able to receive the work that they do and say, okay, this is good, and then give them usable feedback so that they can take it to the next level. And so that's the difference between the middle option here and the third option is saying, okay, this is good, let's keep this, but let's nudge it a little bit further, and know when you're done, and not be satisfied until you're done. So there is a point again about being a self-critic of sorts, or at least to be able to provide that sort of art direction and feedback to both your illustrator and your designer, so that they can do their jobs as effectively as they can, but they need to give the guidance from you to know which direction to go, and when they're done.
Also, Clay,
Yeah.
this cover is like, I have been in my stores, or are no longer mine, I sold the company, but when I would go in there to restock, I witnessed so many times people just stop dead in their tracks and look at your cover. It is breathtaking. It is perfection. And what you don't know from this picture here is that he chose gold foil for some of the stars and for the This I Know portion of the cover. And it just pops. It pops, and it evokes this emotion of the nighttime sky just stands out on a bookshelf. I mean, this cover is perfection. 100%.
Well, thank you for that. And one of the things that there was even talk this week on some of the Facebook groups about, things like dust jackets and all that sort of thing. And I will say one of the things that has helped me sell a lot of copies of this book is that it's very giftable. And so people buy additional copies for baby showers or for Christmas gifts or anything like that. And I think one of the things that's appealing there is it's really beautiful to pull out of the package and out of a present, unwrap it. And so that's a piece of value that I wanted this book to offer. And this middle cover would not have done that. And it might have been a cute book, but it would not have created that wow factor. And so that's one of the things. What do I want to communicate? Well, I really want to communicate both in the editorial sense. I want to create a wow factor with the cover, but I also, in a sales sense and a marketing sense, I want that same reaction so that people buy it and then hopefully rebuy it for other people.
One other small thing before you close out here, but I also really love the space you have between the top of the book and where your title starts.
Oh,
It is
here.
front and center. Yeah. I mean, in the middle one, it's just a little bit too high.
Yeah.
For me, it makes the focal really her face.
Yeah.
And here I see the title first. And so title placement, and here, just an example here, title placement and illustration placement is so critical.
Yeah.
It makes such a big difference for how you view it. And this looks like title first, whereas that looks like illustration first.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a perfect example. Okay, so this is something that most new authors, or even some very experienced authors, you either know this or you don't know this. And so we want to make sure when you leave here today, stop watching this video, that you have some information that will help you guide your illustrator, especially if you're hiring a new one or one that just is set in their ways. So as a book designer, I way too often get illustrations in RGB format. And that's a problem because there's a significant difference between RGB and CMYK. CMYK is for print. You will never see CMYK on a screen. Because you can't, so how can I describe this? RGB has light behind it, so you can get brighter and more beautiful colors, frankly, because you have that reflective light behind those colors, kind of enhancing them and making them brighter. Whereas with print, you don't have that light, and so you're pretty limited in what your printer can achieve. And so all professional printers use 4 colors. They have cayenne, magenta, yellow, and K stands for black. So those are the colors that you've got. And then white is just what's on the page, in the white page. So what colors can you create using CMYK is going to vary greatly between what colors you can get with the light behind it on our screens. So you don't want to use CMYK to view on screens, and you don't want to use RGB to print. And I will show you why. So I don't know if you can see that window, and I'm going to move it either way. This is what you can achieve using RGB colors, and this is what you can achieve using CMYK colors. And no matter how you shake it, it is impossible to print these colors with ink. So these are the colors that you are limited to with printing your books. Now, the problem with receiving RGB colors is that I'm going to have to convert them to CMYK. And then when I convert them to CMYK, I'm asking Photoshop or whatever program you're using to convert these RGB colors to ones that we can achieve with print and ink. And Photoshop or program will often not choose the most vibrant colors. And so I get to be the bad guy when I hand back a very dulled down looking illustration. It's better to have consistency throughout and illustrate in CMYK color format, so that you know exactly what your final product is going to be, and your digital book will look identical to your print book. Now, did I do a good enough job explaining why that's important, Clay? Do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's excellent.
So here's like a quick and brief overview of the differences between CMYK and RGB. When you're sharing your book with friends, like a PDF, you want to share that with RGB mode. Anything that's going to be shared digitally, you want to have RGB. Anything that's going to be printed, you need CMYK. But it's easier. So anything that's in CMYK color, you can achieve in RGB, but you cannot achieve CMYK colors all the time that started in RGB. Does that make sense? The colors are infinite here, but they are not here. So it's better to start with the limited colors and have them converted identically rather than starting with limitless colors and having them converted with fewer options and duller colors. Did that help? I hope. I'm going to overtalk this, but it's a big problem because it's much harder to enhance these Photoshop converted CMYK colors after the fact than it is to choose the brightest and best colors as you're illustrating a book. If you don't ever use RGB, you won't be disappointed by the conversion. So the golden rule should be, or the golden rule is our illustrations should always be done in CMYK format. So when you're starting to enlist the help of an illustrator, make sure that you are asking them to do the illustration in CMYK color mode. Another thing is we definitely need the illustrations in 300 DPI. Now, I would tell you that sometimes I will get illustrations done in higher resolution, and that is not good either. So in theory, you should be able to enlarge that, but it doesn't work that way. So I will receive, sometimes I'll receive an illustration that's done in 600 DPI. Well, it doesn't change the size of the file as much, or the size of the canvas. It just has more dots per inches. And so when I reduce it, I'm asking Photoshop to eliminate half of those pixels. In the same way that I'm asking Photoshop to add pixels when I'm enlarging something more than 25%, it gets blurry. That can also happen when you're reducing a file that has too many pixels, because printers don't want it in 600 DPI, they want it in 300 DPI. So if you're going to increase the resolution for some unknown reason, I wouldn't go higher than 350 personally, because I've seen those differences. Do you agree with that as a designer, Clay?
Yes, absolutely. Because otherwise you basically don't want the computer, Photoshop or what have you to do post processing on your files. You want to go straight from the file to the printer. So with illustrations that are created in RGB, they are getting converted at some point in the process to CMYK, whether you want them to or not, because the printer is printing in cyan, magenta, yellow, and black ink, CMYK. And so that conversion is happening whether you want it to or not. And so you don't want the computer to do that. You want to be the one doing that. Same is true with size. You don't want the computer sizing down the illustrations and making things blurry or eliminating, making some of those choices. Instead, you want the raw data that you have to go straight to the printer. And the best way to do that is to have it originally created in the exact size that you're going to use for printing.
And so a lot of times as designers, when we're giving print specs to illustrators or to the author, because that's the question I get asked a lot. And I say, well, first of all, your printer's going to give you print specs. They're going to give you an exact template for your cover. They're going to tell you exactly what size your interior file should be with bleed, and what kind of safe margins that you have. And they're going to want it in CMYK 300 DPI with a very specific size. And so the reason why I'm bringing up the DPI at this point, which means dots per inch, is because these are typically part of the same conversation. So it's not helpful to increase the DPI in the same way that it would not be helpful to have the resolution be fewer dots per inch. So it's equally as bad to have an illustration done in 200 DPI as it would be to have it done in like 800 DPI. We want it at 300. In CMYK. So before your illustrator starts, make sure that they have the proper interior file size. So if your final product is an 8.5-inch book, but you might decide later that you want to do a 10 by 10 inch offset print, you want your illustrator to illustrate to a 10 by 10 size, because it's easier to go from a 10 by 10 to an 8.5-inch square, because we're not reducing by more than 50%, than it is to increase from an 8.5 to a 10-inch. It's worse to go up, and you really shouldn't ever do that. So make sure you know your trim. make sure your trim is the size of your final book product. So that could be an 8x10, an 8x8.5 by 8.5, a 9x9, a 10x10, or it could be some other crazy size that you decide on your bag yourself. Like my friend and client Leticia Ordaz, she always does something unique. I think I'm doing a book for her right now that's a 9x10 inch, which that's not, no one does that size. She's just special.
One-
So
One thing that I just want to emphasize there is the bleed aspect and the cover size. Cover size is always going to be a little different than the trim size for the book. Yeah, and there's going to be usually a larger bleed on the cover than there is for the interior of the book. So because you're usually wrapping around the edge, and so your printer, this is where it actually is important to talk with a printer probably at the beginning of the process, so you can get some of those specs. Depending on the spine width is going to be different based on the pages. All of that figures into the cover design to some degree, because you really need specs for all of that. And a lot of times I'll do a wraparound cover where the illustration goes from front all the way around to the back. And so in that case, it's essentially one big file where the front of the book is on the right, the back is on the left, because it wraps around.
this
And
is how specific it is. I'm going to just pull this up real
there
quick.
you go. That's a great.
So with a cover file here, okay, this is the actual, this interior square here is the from edge to edge. This is the edge, okay? And so this right here is what wraps around the board of the hardcover. And then this right here is what's trimmed. Okay, so they're gonna print all the way to this edge, but then they're gonna trim it. So your illustrations need to go from edge to edge here. But this, and then this is the part that
gutter.
it's not, I don't, is it cut out? Is it called a gutter on the
What's it called? Vicky, do you remember?
I don't know. This part, if you can see my little
I'm
square.
like, I don't know what it's called, but
Yeah, I don't know what it's
like
called
the
either.
lip or something, the the crease
Oh,
thing.
yeah, the crease thing. There you go. That's definitely the technical term. So this here is your spine, and that's going to vary in size based on how many pages you have internally. And this space right here is basically, it's part of the front cover, but you don't want to put anything important there. Okay, so you want to make sure that your text really begins no closer than here, for it to not fall into that fold here or that crease. I hope that helps you understand. So with an interior file, this is all it is. You have the trim, and then you have like a safe area. So you wouldn't want any, actually I can show you. Actually, maybe, can I?
Called a hinge or a joint.
There you go.
There you go.
Here, let me see. I'm gonna pull this up real quick, because it helps to see what that looks like. And then I'll show you real quick the dust jacket, because if no one's ever seen these before, it's really helpful to know that there's a difference, because a lot of times I'll receive artwork that's done with the same size bleed as the interior for a cover, and that just does not work. So this is the safe area, okay? So this means that I'm not gonna have my text go beyond that point. So I can have text all the way up until this point, but because this is my trim line, I wanna make sure that this is my safe area. So this illustration needs to come all the way to the end here, but I'm not going to have any text or anything that I can risk getting cut off in that safe area.
I usually do one down this side too on the covers, so that
Yeah, I eyeball it, but
Yeah.
it's the same size, so that your book doesn't fall to the gutter.
Yeah.
But yeah, that should also be there.
And for what it's worth, I usually do a half an inch. You're doing a little bit
Right.
less, which is fine.
And then
But
I'll, like,
I usually try to keep it to actually a half-inch safe area. But the point being, yeah, nothing important should be in that margin.
And then this is the dust jacket file for, this happens to be a 10x10 book. This margin right here, this little area here, is what folds over the edge of the book. And then this is the dust jacket flap. So we have the same thing, but you can see how very specific these sizes are for a printer. So it's great if you know who's going to print your book before you start illustrations and before you start the design process. It's not critical. What you can do is just kind of estimate those, like for the cover, you're going to have a 10x10 book. You're going to add another, 3/4 of an inch to an inch all the way around as safe area and the trim. And then we can fudge it from there, but it's better to have it that way than not have any of that extra illustration there at all. Okay, so what will the designer need to do your cover? We need to know which formats you're going to need. So are you going to do an ebook? Are you going to do a paperback and a hardcover? Is it going to be an offset print? Are you doing print on demand? Who's doing the print on demand? Is it going to be Amazon KDP, or is it going to be Ingram Spark? Is it going to be both? And so we need to have a complete list of who you plan to publish with and who's going to be printing your book, so that we can quote accordingly. I know I include 4 formats at my regular rate, but if I'm adding more than that, I charge a little bit more. So just having an idea of how you're going to get your book out into the world is really helpful to start. We do need like this files I just showed you, the cover template, dust jacket template. These are provided by your printer. The interior file, they're probably not going to provide an interior template, but they're going to tell you what kind of bleed and trim that they need, or bleed and trim are the same thing. Sorry, they're going to tell you what kind of bleed you need and what kind of safe area they expect to see. And that's pretty standard. 1.25 inches bleed is pretty standard, and 3.75 inches is pretty standard for the safe area. 0.375 is, I think, is what I said. But we need to know these things before we start to design, because not all printers do things the same way.
But one thing I'd add to the files piece is, we haven't really talked about this, but we mentioned it earlier, like for my cover for this, I know I added foil to the cover. Another thing you can often do to a cover is what we call spot UV, which is basically selective gloss. So the cover might be kind of a duller matte finish, but then the title or the characters have a glossiness to them. I'm sure you've seen something similar to that. There's other things that can be added to the cover. You can do embossing, you can do a lot of different things. So one of the things, if you opt for something like that, you'll need to talk to your printer about how they want to receive those files. But typically it's one additional file that is really just a black and white file. So when I did a file for the foil on my dust jacket, I have the dust jacket file that's a certain size, and then I deliver another file for the foil that's exactly the same size, but where I want the foil, I've got black, and where there's no foil, it's completely white. So it's just white or black. It's essentially here's where the foil goes. And so the printer converts that into, this is where the foil gets printed. So that's an additional file that might be part of this. Go ahead.
I also thought of something else. The difference, we need to know if you're doing an offset print, if you're doing self ends or end sheets, those are different. Because and how your printer wants to receive the files. Some printers want one total interior file that includes end sheets. Some printers want a beginning, like an end sheet packet for the front, and an end sheet packet for the back, and then a packet for the middle, which I call the meat. And they want to receive 3 interior files. So it's really helpful. Or, if they want it as spreads, or if they want it as individual pages. All printers are different. And so these are things that are really helpful to know ahead of time. But it's also that last part that I added isn't something that we need always from the very beginning.
No, but a skilled designer will assist you with that.
But we do at some point need to know how to deliver your files.
Right.
It's pretty easy to separate things like that and stuff when we're finalizing everything, but it is helpful to have it all up front, because what will frustrate me as a designer is I try and allocate a week and a half to 2 weeks per book. And if I'm waiting on clients to deliver things like that, 3-4 days, that's really screwing up my schedule. So I have this thing in my contract where I require everything up front for me to begin work. And that's just strictly so I'm not waiting on anybody for things like, the barcode, the ISBN, the prices, what you want on this spine, your back blurb, how often what did I do? I often will get, like the blurb being changed 10 times at the very end. It's really helpful to have all this finalized, because how much text and what the text is and what emphasis we're putting on specific words, all that goes into the design of things. So it's really helpful to have all of that information up front. As a designer, I provide a list of everything I need to get going, which is much longer than this, but this is like a pretty easy overview. And then if you have an opinion about the pagination, that should be on here too. Pagination is the order in which the pages appear. So if you know that you want the copyright notice to be at the very end of the book because you don't want to bore your reader with that in the very beginning of the book, we should know that in advance. I like to make recommendations for how I think a book should be laid out, and we can discuss it. I do that when I onboard a new client. But if you have opinions about that, let me know early, let Clay know early, or whoever your designer is, and then we can incorporate those recommendations with something we know that you feel strongly about.
This is again where, yeah, a lot of people try to tackle some of these things on their own, and there's a lot of details here and a lot of stuff to understand about not only design, but the printing process and files and all of that sort of thing. So it is
And simple things like your designer can inform you on if you're not aware that if you're printing in China, you absolutely have to have that information on your book somewhere where it's very easy to find, printed in China. Legally, you have to have that information on there. You know, you should have all of your ISBN formats on one book. Otherwise, you have to have 3 different versions of your book with different ISBNs. Just stuff like that. I can, you know, a designer or someone who does this all the time can kind of help guide you on that, so you're not working in the, you know, in the dark here. There are just a couple other things I wanted to show before I let Clay here. So this is my next book. This was my horrible, very quick 5-minute sketch, but I wanted to try and choose fonts and make sure that there was plenty of space for the title. I wanted the title to be primary. And so I sent this to my illustrator after I kind of decided on a rough, I had 2 font choices that I really liked. Both of them were about the same size. I sent him back a file that was that file I just showed you for the cover. I literally sent him that file with text option 1, text option 2, text option 3, where I'd be happy with any of those combinations, okay, with my very horrible sketch of kind of what I had in mind for the cover, that he could kind of flip through and then illustrate into the same file so that he and I were working together collaboratively. And rather than him sending me a sketch and then me trying to fit the title into it, I knew that I wanted to make sure that we were thinking through this from top to bottom before he ever sketched anything. So this is what I gave him. The reason why I chose this particular scene, I'll just give you a quick overview of my book. It's about a little girl and a pet dragon, or her pet dragon, and she's tasked with feeding this dragon because her mom is not home. And normally mom feeds a dragon, but she has this emergency because the last time her dragon was hungry, he started spitting fire and he accidentally caught her pants on fire and she had to drop and roll and she got toasted underwear. And so that created the urgency in my book. And then she ended up feeding this dragon all of her favorite junk foods. But ultimately dragon just wants to eat healthy. And that's what she discovers at the end of the book. So what didn't make it into the book was him catching her pants on fire. And I thought that would make a very hilarious cover art and kind of evoke the interest of buyers. And so he sent me back this in the same file. So he sent me back this. He kind of chose this. He thought this would be a good spot for this. I looked at it and thought, okay, well, this isn't perfect, but I know I can make room for the word hungry since it doesn't fit perfectly in this frame. And so I gave him the okay to proceed with that. Then he sent, this is his final artwork. Now, this looks really ugly, so just ignore that. Remember, this is just the bleed, but if you're looking strictly at the guides here, this is intended to make the book look singed, like it was on fire. But this was the artwork, his final artwork that he sent me, which is awesome, in my opinion. He's so talented. And then this was my final cover. So as you can see, I use the same space, but I fit that word hungry in here, and I have it interacting with the illustration where the fire is really going through the words, and the text is actually on fire a little bit. And then you have movement where you have kind of like soot and what is that? What is that called? Soot?
ashes.
Ashes. There you go. Ashes. That's
Probably. Well,
and so there's a lot of things that we discussed here that I kind of implemented in this book. I've got a focal point here. This is an action. There's definitely movement. He's spitting fire. She's running. There's smoke blowing. There's a Z, right? The title, character, title. They're moving to the right. There's hierarchy of text here where we have hungry is the primary focus, followed by uh-oh and dragon. My is unimportant, and so is so you can see there's a hierarchy of words, a text here. And I didn't assign roles to the credits here. I tried to make it pretty out of the way. I did ask for some feedback, and people thought that her pants being on fire was a little bit too much, a little bit too scary, and so I had him fix her butt, and this is the final. So this is kind of the start to finish of my next book cover. I hope you can kind of see how what Clay and I were talking about with planning your cover. and kind of how that worked out for this particular book cover in the end. But then let's talk about not having a book plan. So my client Ashley Curran, her next book is adorable. It's on a boat on its way here, and I need to move you guys. And the artwork that her illustrator gave me just wasn't very strong. And so one of the for the cover, and this is again just my opinion, but one of my jobs as a designer is really to help guide my clients on the best illustration to use for the cover. And so what we talked about here was maybe using this illustration for the cover. And this is an interior page, an interior design. And so I basically just pulled this little guy here and turned it into this cover here, where the obviously the text is interacting with the illustration. He's sitting on him, but the boy is going in and out of the text. The E is bonking him on the head. You can see some movement, some action lines here. And then I just added a really simple background that kind of matched the illustration style. You can see this illustration style is kind of scratchy. It looks like pencils. And so I picked a font that was kind of scratchy. And I think this came together really nicely. She was very happy with it. I added some shadows. It looks like he's being squished on top of the word dinosaur. I really like how this came out. But one of the things that we can do as designers at the end is just kind of make suggestions for an alternate plan. If there could be something that could work better. And that's all I have to show. Actually, there's only one other thing I wanted to show you. That was my final cover because I said I would. This was my final cover design. I think that I showed the progression of it, but I didn't show the end. I should add that. But this is how it came together. You can see the wind and the movement, the leaves blowing in the wind, the lightning and the dark cloudy skies, but there's also a sense of bravery and defeating and overcoming the fear. So that's how
that's where I think it's important. It's not resolution. It's not just conflict. It's a little of both. So you have the light coming from behind him, and a sense, the posture, even though there's fear in his eyes, there's still a posture of bravery and confidence. And so it's really well done to capture both of those.
Thanks, friend.
This is a cover I did a while ago for Nick Smith. And he gave me, he had a lot already developed. He had already done had the illustrations done, and he had mocked up the cover on the left here, selected a font, which actually I thought was a great match for his illustration style. You see the illustrations are kind of curvy and geometric, that sort of thing. Somewhat Disney-esque, if you will. And the font reflects that. So the font has some of those same curves that are in the illustrations. So, but all he's got here is kind of the font just typed in, just straight across, no very little visual hierarchy. He does have a subtitle here, but it's just pretty simple. And what I did the whole interior of the book as well, but for the cover, we did this. And so, added a lot more visual hierarchy. The word the and the are unimportant words, so they get a lot smaller. We just got rid of the subtitle here because it was not valuable to the reader. And then the word giants is giant, the word smalls is smaller, and so it helps communicate that. And so this is again taking what was already had good progress, but really just kind of what design can do is really take it over the finish line and make it a lot stronger. And so a designer will take the raw materials of that the author and the illustrator bring and just bring it together. So that was one piece. Another thing, just in terms of font selection, book I'm working on at the moment. And this is a couple interior spreads from them. And I went through a ton of fonts here, but I wanted something that again kind of has the illustrations here are kind of similar to Nick Smith's book, with that kind of Disney feel to it. A lot of sharp corners and curvy edges. So anyway, I wanted a font that was a little more a little more hip and sharp, and so this is the one I ended on, but it's still very readable. And but then I can do fun stuff with it like this one. You know, there's energy here, and again, you can use your text to kind of communicate that energy and the motion. You have the scribbles above the bus driver's head and on Parker's face, and that's kind of reflected in the font choice and the font color as well.
I'm so
So,
excited for this book.
I
Sorry.
know, I need to. This is what I've been
Dude, I
working
look up these illustrations. Look at Parker. You
Oh.
love them, and
So anyway, those are coming, and but yeah, that's those are just some more details to kind of emphasize what we talked about earlier.
I mean, I've learned a lot and I already knew some of these things. You know, I'm not a designer, I do not claim to be, but you know, when you are going to be working with professionals in the self-publishing side, it's so important that you at least know um the basics so that you can communicate properly, you can hire the right people, you understand when someone is telling you, hey, you know, this is something with the bleed, you actually understand what they're saying and can work through the problems and actually you know, achieve what you would like to happen with your book. So I can't
right.
thank you enough for being here.
No,
Seriously.
I'm really grateful that you invited both of us, especially Clay. I mean, he's not the cool kid, so he doesn't always
Thanks for including me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I will put I'll put links to both of your websites in the description below this video, and then I'll also include a link to your Facebook group below because I think that's a really great resource for feedback on covers as well as other great information just about publishing in general. So thank you so much for being here.
Yes,
Thank you.
Vicky, thank you.
I'll see you soon, Clay. Bye, Vicky.
All right.